good for the school? We just said that. All the bureaucrat has to do is take your card, put it in the pile. But you get somebody who is a ritualist, the bureaucrat from hell. What does that person do?
Oh dear, it's 501, 501, I'm sorry. You may not place your card. All it takes is putting the card in the pile. No, we can accept nothing like that. It's past the time. The rules clearly state.
That kind of stuff. You'll find that. If you haven't already, you'll eventually find a bureaucrat like that. And what you want to do is go around them. They're letting the rules get in the way of what's really good for the company. All right, that's ritualism. Michel's iron law of oligarchy is part of this stuff, but it reflects on hierarchy. Michel's was a student of Max Weber's, Robert Michel's, that's his last name. Worked with Weber, but started to recognize that all this stuff here wasn't fully right. Not all the time. Most of the time, but not all the time. And he said, look, let's be realistic about this. When you create a hierarchy, yeah, it's mostly efficient, but you put people in positions of power and they are inevitably going to get attached to that position. The last thing anybody who's been made CEO wants to do is to give up that power. What that means, it doesn't happen all the time. What that means, this is not a universal rule, but what that means is if that person on top has to choose between what's good for them personally and what's good for the efficiency of their company, if those two conflict, now it's usually the case they go together. The head of the corporation makes a profitable company, that guy gets more money, so he's going to try and make it profitable. But there are occasional times in which what's good for that guy on top goes against what's good for the company. And at that point, given human nature, which one are they going for? Yeah, they're looking out for themselves. Real world example, 2008. The worst recession in this country's history since about 1929 is about to begin. Banks have played monopoly with money. They're going down the tubes. The federal government intervenes and bails them out. Did it cost this country literally trillions of dollars in loans to bail out the banks? Yes, it did. Were American taxpayers happy about paying off money out of their own pockets to bail out multi-millionaire banks to the tune of trillions of dollars? No, they were not. And then what did the bankers do with some of the money they got from the U.S. government? What did they do?
Buy gold.
Buy gold? No. Well, they might have. But first, what did they do? Exactly. They gave themselves bonuses. They just not nearly brought down their own company. They nearly brought down the entire American economy. Making some of the stupidest decisions since the Great Depression, yet they went ahead and gave themselves bonuses with the money the U.S. taxpayer had ponied up. One, was that good for the company? No. Americans at that point hated banks. Two, was it good for the country? Absolutely not. Who was it good for? Themselves. How come they did it? It's very simple. It's a lesson my dad told me many years ago. My dad was a working class kind of guy, and he was kind of gross. One day I remember him pointing to a dog. "Look at that doggy over there, boy." He said to me, "What is that doggy doing?" "He's licking his genitals." "And you know why?" "Because can." Yeah, my dad was quite the wit. How come those bankers did it? Because they can. Because they can. And that's exactly what Robert Michels was recognizing. That if there is a conflict, and it doesn't happen all the time, between what's good for the guy on top and what's good for the company, they're going for themselves. That is part of what happens when you set up a hierarchy with human beings. It's not just there for efficiency, it's also there, and those people get power and prestige and status, and they like that. Okay, any questions on Robert Michels' iron law of oligarchy? That's another major source of inefficiency. The next two, Peter Principle and Parkinson's Law. These are much less common. Peter Principle simply says, you will rise to your level of incompetence in a bureaucracy. Follow this one. Well, when do you get a promotion inside of a bureaucracy? When you do good. And as long as you do good, will you continue to be promoted? Pretty much.
In theory.
And in theory. But when will you no longer be promoted?
When there's no more job available for the good?
When there's no more job to be available, or when you are no longer what?
Doing good at that job.
Good at your job. Let's say you're a typist or a data entry clerk, a keyboarder, and you're really good at that. You can do 100 words a minute, no errors. Whoa. You get promoted to data entry clerk 2 because you're good at that. You're still good on that keyboard. You get promoted to supervisors of data entry clerks themselves, and because you were good at data entry, you can teach it pretty well. And you finally get promoted to supervisor of all clerical help, but you're not that good at that. So you've just been what? Promoted to what? Your level of incompetence. And that's the Peter Principle. That's the Peter Principle. These next two, the Peter Principle and Parkinson's Law, are much less useful because they are fairly narrowly applied, largely to government bureaucracies. In government, because of civil service protections, it's often much easier to promote than to demote. In the private sector, if we promote you to a level and you can't handle it, what do? Demote or fire you. But in government, if we promote you to a point at which you can't really do your job, it's so hard to fire you, you often just end up staying there. And that's why the Peter Principle and Parkinson's Law really apply mostly to government bureaucracies, and that's why we think of the DMV and blah, 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 that kind of stuff. All right, and finally, Parkinson's Law. And that says something similar to Peter Principle. Oh, and after Weber, people started naming their theories of bureaucracy after themselves, demonstrating the importance of human ego in this stuff. Parkinson was another management consultant who said, look, in a bureaucracy, work expands to fill the time made available for it. Work expands to fill the time made available for it. What does that mean? Look, if I'm a supervisor of clerical help here on campus, and I'm assigning tasks, I'm going classroom to classroom, assigning janitors to do work. So I walk in here, I take a look around, and I think, oh, the floor looks pretty clean. Let's clean the board, straighten the chairs, there's some crap underneath them, you clean that up, yeah, put that stuff up there. I'll give you 20 minutes to do it. The guy starts working and realizes with any effort, he can get it done in 5 minutes. So what does he do?
Waits 15.
Takes an extra 15 to get it done. And what has happened? Work has expanded to fill the time made available for it. Typically, the philosophy here is better the devil you know than the devil you don't know. By that, look, I clean this stuff up here. Yeah, not great, but if I get done soon, he'll just give me more work. And that might be worse than what I'm doing right now. I could be cleaning toilets at the end of the building in the restroom, and I just as soon sweep the floors here. In other words, you give somebody 20 minutes, you give somebody an hour, they'll take an hour to do a job in that bureaucracy. And there's a corollary point, and that is funding in the bureaucracy expands to fill the amount made available during a fiscal year. You give a agency in a bureaucracy $2,000 for the fiscal year, will they spend that $2,000? Yeah. Now, I've been in this situation personally. I used to be chair of the department, and we'd have a miscellaneous budget. It was an academic year. At the beginning of the academic year, come fall, they give us a couple $1,000 just in case, something happened. You need to replace a ribbon on a printer, or the fax machine went out, or something like that. And so you had that money available. In an emergency, you could just run out and buy something with it. And the first part of the year, you tend to be very conservative with that money because you're afraid. If you use it all up in fall, what happens if a couple printers go out in spring and all the money's gone? But come spring, at the end of spring, that's the end of our academic year, and you've got $1,000 left in the fund with only a month left in the academic year. Do you give back money in a bureaucracy? Never. Never. How come? Exactly. If you give back $1,000 this year, next year, will your appropriation be cut by that $1,000? But you might need it then. And I have literally been in this situation at the end of an academic year trying to encourage people to buy something. I'd call them on the phone. Do you need a new fax machine? How about a printer? Is that computer going out? Because we had half the budget left over and we didn't want to give it back. And that's basically Parkinson's law. All right, questions on this stuff? Questions? Sources of inefficiency in a bureaucracy. Remember, most of this conversation, Weber, the informal side, is trying to explain the sources of efficiency. We had to account for common sense as well. Yeah.
So then, is there an opposite effect to Parkinson's law where, like, let's say, a person in this room, they only get 3 minutes instead of 20, and it would take them 5? Is there a rule for that?
Well, that's called speed up. If it really takes longer than what you've been given, that's called speed up. And that's more in the typical tradition of bureaucracy. We have the guy on top gives the orders, you follow it, they have expectations, you have to live up to it. And you just have to work with a quicker machine-like efficiency. That kind of fits the general model. Okay. So that's that stuff. Let me briefly go over a couple of concepts that I wanted you to read about in that last chapter, chapter 13 on politics. I tested you on this a little bit, but I want to make sure everyone understands it. First, the difference between authority versus power, according to Weber. Remember, power is a big deal for Weber. Remember what anybody remember what the definition is? We talked about it earlier in the class. According to Weber, what's power, Michael?
The ability to get something against opposition.
Exactly. You get what you want even when other people resist. That means power is non-voluntary. Non-voluntary. I put a gun to your head and I say jump. You are going to say how high. It does not depend on your willingness to obey my rules. I've got the ability to get you to do what I want. Even when you, and this is the key, when you resist. Authority for Weber is where you willingly obey rules. The difference between power and authority is